Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down the big topics from the world around us. So, what is the missing piece in building a truly lasting peace? Well, today we're exploring a pretty powerful idea, one that suggests the answer has been right in front of us this whole time. And that answer? It's women. We're going to dive into the women, peace, and security agenda, looking at a global framework and its very real, very tough challenges on the ground. To really get why this is such a big deal, we first have to understand something really crucial about the nature of modern conflict. For the longest time, people talked about security and peacemaking as if they were somehow gender neutral. But that's just not true. The hard reality is that war and instability, they hit women differently, and often a lot harder. And yet, for all that time, the absolutely critical role women can play in preventing and ending these conflicts, well, it's been almost completely overlooked. Okay, so with that in mind, let's turn to how the international community finally decided to respond to this very problem. It was a landmark moment. And here it is, UN Security Council Resolution 1325. When this was passed back in 2000, it was a total game changer. Seriously. It was this huge shift away from just thinking of peace as, the fighting stopped. For the very first time, the world formally recognized that you can't have sustainable peace, the kind that actually lasts, unless women have a real, meaningful seat at the table where the decisions are being made. So how does it work? Well, the resolution is built on these four big ideas, or pillars, and they all work together. It's not just about one single thing. First, you've got prevention, the idea of stopping conflicts before they even start. Then there's participation, making sure women are actually involved in resolving them. Third, and this is huge, is protection, actively shielding women and girls from violence. And finally, you have relief and recovery efforts, making sure that when we rebuild, we're doing it in a way that actually meets their specific needs. It's this whole package, a complete blueprint for looking at security in a totally new way. Okay, so that all sounds great on paper, right? But the million-dollar question is, how do you take a big global blueprint like this and actually make it work on the ground? To see how this plays out, we're going to zoom in on the example of Pakistan and see where these global goals crash into local reality. The key to making this happen is something called localizing. And that's more than just, translating the document. It means a country has to create its very own national action plan. They call it a NAP for short. To take these big global ideas and actually make them fit its own specific policies, its own institutions, and its own culture. But as you can probably guess, that journey from a global promise to local action, it's a rocky one. It's filled with some major hurdles. In Pakistan's case, we're talking about deep-seated structural and cultural barriers. There's also just a lack of institutional muscle, not enough trained staff to do the work. And on top of that, there are really weak systems for even checking if progress is being made. What happens then? Well, a lot of the time, these efforts end up being driven by outside donors instead of coming from within the country itself. And this really shows you that gap perfectly. The goal, what everyone's aiming for, is a strong, unified national action plan that's really being pushed by the government. But the reality, it's a bit different. What you actually see are these amazing, dedicated civil society groups doing the work. But often, they're kind of on their own, without strong coordination or real support from the government. This quote right here, it really gets to the core of a huge mindset problem. So when a country's security approach is mostly kinetic, and that's just another way of saying it's focused on military force, on combat, it actually squeezes out the space for things like peace building. And in that kind of environment, the crucial life-saving work that women do is just dismissed. It's seen as non-essential. All right, so let's put some numbers to this. What does this implementation gap actually look like when you break it down? So, let's look at the justice sector. We're talking about the people whose job it is to uphold the law and deliver justice. And when you do, a pretty stark picture starts to form. Okay, so get this. Across the whole country, there are over 3,000 judges. Of those, only about 18% are women. Now look, that's better than it used to be for sure. But it still shows this huge imbalance right at the top of the system that's supposed to deliver justice for everyone. And if you think that number is low, wait till you see the police force, the most visible part of the security system. Nationwide, just 3.2% of police officers are women. And that 3.2% average, it actually hides some really big differences from place to place. So as of 2023, the capital, Islamabad, is doing the best, but Best is still only about 5%. Then you look at a province like KP, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and that number drops to less than 1.5%. And look, these numbers really, really matter. They're not just stats on a page. They tell you who has access to power within the very system that's meant to protect people. So where do we go from here, right? How do you actually turn this all around and move from just talking about it to making a real impact? Well, the path forward really requires a big shift, from promises to actual practice. First up, we need better data collection, so we can actually see what's working and what isn't. You need dedicated budgets, so this stuff isn't just an afterthought when the money runs out. You've got to sync up the laws, from the national level all the way down to the local level. And maybe most important of all, you have to promote genuine inclusion. That means it's not enough to just invite women into the room. You have to make sure their voices are actually heard, respected, and acted on. And really, that's the bottom line here. It's not just about passing more laws or creating new departments that look good on paper. The real challenge, the fundamental one, is changing the system itself. It's about making sure women are not just there as symbols, but as real players with a real voice in shaping their country's security and its future. Which leaves us with one last pretty powerful question to think about. It's a question that kind of challenges our whole idea of what security even means. If a security policy doesn't work for half the population, can it really, truly be said to work at all? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us.